Welcome to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, and on podcast on all major platforms. I'm Paul Smith, host of Food Farm Talk. Please follow our podcast and our social media feeds. Today you'll hear an episode of Stories of Regeneration, a podcast series by Regeneration Canada, based in Montreal, Quebec, and Rural Roots for Climate Solutions, based in Stettler, Alberta, with funding from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We thank Regeneration Canada and Rural Roots for Climate Solutions for permission to air this episode.
Awesome. Okay. Did you guys have any questions? I know we did the phone calls, but is there anything about this you're curious about? During the growing season of 2023, a ragtag group of storytellers, community organizers, and strategists descended on 10 farms and ranches in Canada to tell a story. Part of the story was how there's a growing group of Canadian farmers and ranchers who have chosen to farm and ranch in a way that not only produces great tasting food, packed full of nutrients, but they're also regenerating the land, communities, and ecosystems in the process. If you're curious, when I first started doing podcasts, for some reason I thought you needed like a phone sex voice, so I dropped the tone of my voice down to like, hey, I'm going to talk about cows today. From Rogersville, New Brunswick to Cawson, British Columbia, farmers and ranchers opened up their homes and shared a lot about their lives and their views on agriculture with us in this traveling band. Some of it even brought us to tears. Don't worry, there was also a lot of laughter in there too. Don't feel like you need to do anything like that.
No. All right, we're good to go.
Good?
Yeah, no questions.
Sweet. I'm Derek Leahy, host of the Rural Roots to Climate Solutions podcast, and this is the final episode of our series on the farmers and ranchers who are driving and inspiring the transition to regenerative agriculture, a system of agriculture that by design is determined to leave things better off than when we found them.
Maybe a bit of philosophical level is with regen agriculture, you work with ecosystem and you see how a system works, not the human system, but you see how one thing help another thing. You're at the farm, everything is connected.
Conventional agriculture is about how can I make this soil give me what I want, regardless of what the soil wants to do, you know. And regenerative agriculture is focused on how can I get this soil to thrive, how can I get the ecosystem to thrive, so then it can produce the food in the best way possible.
Rural Roots to Climate Solutions, in partnership with Regeneration Canada, presents Stories of Regeneration, a podcast series exploring why we, as a society, need to get behind the farmers and ranchers who are regenerating the land, ecosystems, and local economies through their agricultural principles and practices. Farmers and ranchers who are striving for great things through regenerative agriculture. Part 10, Everybody Wins, with Sun Shan and Chadwick Lewis of Just Food Community Farm in Ottawa, Ontario, December 18th, 2023.
My name is Sun Shan. I'm a farmer, and I'm also a half agriculture, half eggs kind of practitioner. I live in Ottawa.
My name is Chadwick Lewis. I'm a farmer. I live on the west end of Ottawa. My focus is I also do nursery. I do an organic nursery setup. So organic food and CSAs and seedlings for aspiring gardeners.
And Chadwick, do you have it sounds like you're pretty busy with all of that, but a lot of farmers have off-farm jobs these days. Do you have an off-farm job as well?
Somewhat in the fall, but most of the time I'm full-time.
Okay.
So in the fall I would teach labs in landscape maintenance at the local college.
Oh, cool. Is it at Algonquin College? Or?
Yes, at Algonquin College.
Very cool. Okay, well, I know your answer to this one, but Do you want to explain all your off-farm jobs or just pick the top 3?
For sure, yeah. So in addition to farming and when I said half agriculture, half something else, it's a real thing. It is a concept invented by a Japanese author after observing many of what farmers do these days. It's called half farming, half X. So that X for me is I'm a cultural interpreter. I work with a local community interpretation services here in Ottawa, providing medical interpretation, cultural interpretation. I go to a lot of people's homes, just helping to bridge the gaps between languages of Mandarin and English. And I also, I teach. During the winter months, we teach fermentation. We teach food preservation techniques. And I'm also an aspiring writer.
By the time I sat down with Sun Shan and Chadwick, it was December. The growing season was over, so I never actually visited Just Food Community Farm. We recorded in a warm and cozy recording studio in downtown Ottawa. Even though I missed my chance to visit Just Food Community Farm that year, I've actually been there before. During the summer of 2015, when I was a resident of Ottawa for about a hot minute, a couple of friends of mine ran a CSA, or Community Supported Agriculture Program, from Just Food Community Farm. And I used to help them out once a week in exchange for a veggie basket. It was a really great way to break up the, sometimes the monotony of sitting in front of a computer all day. I have a lot of great memories of being out there with Justin, Lisa, and Brigitte. It was also extremely relevant for the job I had at the time, because at that point I was one of the coordinators of Food Secure Canada's Eat, Think, Vote campaign. That campaign itself was all about trying to make food a federal election issue. So recording this episode was a bit of a trip down memory lane for me. And when we recorded the episode, I found out that the farmer who was just across the footpath from us during the summer of 2015, I found out that farmer passed away around the time that we recorded. And the community around Just Food Community Farm was definitely feeling that loss. So we decided to do what little we could in a situation like this. And we'd like to dedicate this episode, the final episode of the series, to the memory of Dan Van Vliet, aka the Nightshade King, also dedicated to his family and everybody who's missing him right now. We are really sorry for your loss. The Just Food Community Farm is not your average farm. It's more like an incubator of farms and farmers.
Well, the Just Food Farm is a community farm that is on public lands, National Capital Commission lands, and its goal is to help with food security. And it does that in a number of different ways, from having small market farmers on site who farm to sell their produce, as well as commons gardeners who just want to have a large enough garden, a larger than backyard garden plot. And then there's also, it does facilitate stuff off-site. Like, for example, the community garden network around Ottawa is facilitated by Just Food. And that part Sun Shan would be able to speak more on. But it really is like, it's meant to be an incubator for small farming businesses, like my own, among others. And there's a lot going on there. Like, it really does lower the barrier of entry for people wanting to get into farming, in the sense that, there's less things that you need to come out of pocket with up front to handle when you get started. And the fact is that getting into farming is very expensive. So having a place like that is paramount to just getting more food security on a whole, because then you get more people who've gone through that program, maybe get a couple seasons or 3, 4, or 5 seasons under their belt, and are able to also mentor other people, and then able to go into their own farms and now be a part of the food industry in and around the capital region. So the work that Just Food is doing is like so much more than just, it's a community farm, but it's also like a culture. I said the other day to Mo that it's like a sort of college/university on how to really do this because otherwise, if you would imagine if you bought the land and you had to go ahead and farm it and figure out all these things off the top of your head, like just the infrastructural things, without even the inputs, without even getting to the growing yet, would be a lot to manage. So yeah, Just Food is like a godsend to a lot of farmers, including myself. And I would love to see more of that in and around the city and around Ontario, around Canada in different ways.
Oh, it's super unique. It's like I've traveled decently for this tour, and I haven't really come across anything like Just Food. Sun Shan, anything you wanted to add to that question?
Sure, yeah. So if you imagine like being in the capital city and then it's only 13 kilometers east of a capital, Parliament Hill, the Peace Tower. So it is super close to a urban center and is situated on Greenbelt. And this is, I think, by design for a city to have these areas of green to be accessed by public. And in this particular case, organic agriculture. We wouldn't be able to afford to farm, honestly, if we didn't have access to land like this. And also not just the land, it's the community support. Like what Chadwick said, it's like an incubator. And both of us were part of the startup farming program. And the program provides trainings over the winter months, and then both theory training and tractor and a lot of hands-on stuff. And then you start the next spring on a small piece of land, 1/4 of an acre. And then you can upgrade yourself if you find that farming is indeed for you. And then you can apply to have access to a bigger piece of land. And it's also that the farm is an ecosystem, and it has Greens Creek, one of the Ottawa River tributary, running through the farm on the northwest side, where there is ravine and forest, and the children play there. It's a nature school and other healing programs, and children and adults, people who really live in the city but need access to wilderness, to a playing area that's inside of nature. So the farm is a very unique combination indeed, not of farming, but also of community growing and of accessing to nature, community building. And there are a lot of interactions among all the groups mentioned.
That's really cool. I think often we forget that community is part of the ecosystem. I think a lot of times when we talk about ecosystem, we think of Gatineau Park. That's not where humans live. That's where everything else lives. But honestly, even in this building, we're part of an ecosystem. But the ecosystem that you're farming in sounds like one that it's trying to build up community, and it's something that you can connect with all the other the non-human living things that live in our ecosystem as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think from a couple of years ago, and the farm officially refers itself to as Just Food Community Farm. So I think that's the name that we go by these days.
Oops, sorry about that.
But just to think about it, when you said all the wildlife, my things Sun Shan can attest, we see deer on a regular basis on the farms, to the point where we need to have deer fencing.
Oh no.
Yeah, there's wild turkeys all the time, which is another problem. But it also speaks to the naturalness of the area. Foxes, I've seen foxes on site. I mean, foxes run for the city, but not like this. Coyotes, you name it, you would see a lot of these. There's eagles on the side and hawks on the side.
Yep.
And during the summer months, you see all these little snakes running around. So it's really nature in the city. Then you get the dog walkers who come by just because it's a fun place to walk through. So it is really a gem of the community in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for farming that, I'm probably jumping ahead here, but for farming that can both be a blessing and also a challenge. I remember the first year we have chickens at the farm, a fisher. We worked out it has to be a fisher because of the skill it killed. So we lost a couple of chickens to fisher. On the other hand, I think it's University of Ottawa's entomology insect studying group that discovered more ground-dwelling bees at the farm than they found in most of the park settings in the city. So, and of course, they provide all kinds of services, visible and intangible, to the things we grow. So it is like we're growing very close to a natural ecosystem.
And let's not forget that there's also a beekeeper on site. There's a veterans healing space on site, women warriors healing garden, and they have donkeys and chickens. And every single kid who comes to the farm wants to say hi to the donkey. So it's like it really is this unique space that you could see so many things, but you haven't really left the city, and that is like when I say it, I feel this fuzzy feeling inside. Like it's really amazing. Like it's like like you go to Toronto, and I remember dealing. My wife works in hair, and she does hair for film sometimes. And one of the actresses was saying that you guys have trees everywhere. She's from Toronto, and she's like, that doesn't happen in Toronto. It's not so green. And I'm like, to have, like, even people who live here and see all the parks and stuff didn't even know, don't know that something like Just Food exists right here in the city, and that is not a common thing. And, sometimes you kind of want to take it for granted, but then when you really think about it, that is not commonplace at all.
Well, let's get into your own farming businesses. One thing, actually, I have no idea what the names of your farms are. So maybe we'll start. Sun Shan, does your farm have a name?
Sure. It's Chi Garden.
Okay.
CHI Garden. And we now refer to it, the full name would be Chi Garden Ecological Farm and Fermentation Kitchen. But then, in short, Chi Garden.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you have going on in the Chi Garden?
We grow vegetables. We try to grow as many perennial vegetables as possible, but a lot of annual as well. And then we sell them at local farmers market, farmstead. But also we run a thriving fermentation business, turning our own vegetables and then vegetables from other fellow farmers into delicious kimchi and sauerkraut and a lot of cultural crowds.
Would you need access to a commercial kitchen to do that? And is there one on site?
There is a space that we are making available dedicated to fermentation on site. A usual fermentation kitchen wouldn't work for this purpose because fermentation work with microbes and the lactobacteria and other bacteria and then fungi that help your substrate grow into delicious food. So they're quite touchy in many ways, especially when you work with many different types of microbes. So now we have our own space at the farm.
Oh, very cool. Chadwick, same question for you. What's the name of your farm and what do you got going on?
My farm is called Urban Fresh Produce. We grow 30 plus. I'm being conservative with that number because when people ask me what I grow, it's a lot of vegetables. Mostly annual stuff. We also do seedlings and nurseries out of the greenhouse on site, one of the greenhouses on site. So we serve the community in terms of that, and anywhere from 10,000 to 16,000 plants.
Wow.
Produced out there. We also produce seedlings for other farmers on site for their fields based on the orders. So that's a big part of it for us. And we produce seedlings for some bulk clients. Like, there's a few schools that deal with us that order seedlings and then they resell them at their school garden sales, garden center sales. So we provide that help as well. We provide that at a reduced cost to them and allow them to have their own fundraisers with it. So a bulk of it is providing seedlings to the community and providing vegetables, which we sell through CSA. We have a good CSA going. And then we also have farmers markets that we sell at. And as of this year, we've started selling to a few restaurants and one of the local universities for their dining services. So that was welcomed. And we're just figuring out how to make more of those connections and find which ways work best for us in terms of selling our produce.
And this is one of my favorite questions to ask folks who are kind of new to agriculture. Because obviously agriculture is a lot of hard work, doesn't necessarily play super well, but we can start with Chadwick and then we'll go Sun Shan. How did you get into agriculture?
Well, I used to work in sales and customer service. And I was really disillusioned with that, I guess. The office job that pays well type thing. You know, I had an uncle who had set up a garden at my family home. This is not in Canada, this is back home in St. Lucia. Then I just really liked that thing, and then he died unexpectedly. And after that, I wanted to tend to that garden, and I just got into it, and I was like, you know what, this is what I want to do. And then I spoke to my mom about it. She's like, well, if you want to do that kind of thing and you want to become a farmer, then you should go connect with my uncle, her uncle, which is my great uncle, on the family estate, and learn from him. And then I went through the process of becoming a registered farmer, got into it, did as much learning as I could, and then never looked back. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what it was. I mean, it was like realizing like this is boring, and I'm not sure if I could use swear words, but bull. You know what I mean? Sitting there in an office, you're unhealthy as whatever it could be, and just sitting there doing nothing. It's like, it is horrible. It gets to you. And then I remember every single day leaving there feeling like, wow, I'm getting out of jail. Like I'm being released. I'm happy to be, and then coming back the next day, like I got to do this again. Like what? And I never get that feeling with farming. I mean, it's stressful in its own ways. It's stressful on the body, but the fresh air, it's not monotonous. There's nothing that can be said for that. I never get that feeling with it, so that's why.
Awesome. Okay. So Shan, same question. How'd you get into agriculture?
We probably can call ourselves accidental farmers, but thinking back, it's not so accidental either. We had a long, both when I say we, it is my husband, Libo, and myself, we had a long career of doing environmental work as nonprofit group, nonprofit organizers. And that is both exciting, really invigorating, but also extremely exhausting and in certain ways demoralizing. So after having done that for 15 years, we wanted to take a break from just using mostly our computers and going to meetings and mobilizing and all of that, turning that into something and combining our deep love for earth and for nature to something that we can do with our hands and our heart. So we came to Canada in 2014 and lived in rural Ontario, where we explored around, and we were like, maybe we can try living off the land and really using our knowledge on the environment. And I'm also a trained biologist, to combine that with, working on the land and growing things. So we visited 30, 40 different farms just to understand what everybody were doing and if it is something for us. So we put our son to school. He was 6 at the time. And then we time ourselves. There is a 3-hour one-way kind of radius. So we visited all the farms that were willing to open their doors to us. And after half a year, we decided that it is something that we may also be able to do. So we started in September 2014, half year after we came to Canada, on a farm in Bruce County, Ontario, to explore that farming dream. And we're still here 8 years after.
At this part in the interview, Chadwick and Sun Shan go over the different regenerative agriculture practices they use on their individual farms at the Just Food Community Farm.
For me, regenerative practices that I use mainly would be just chop and drop, sort of, where you just weed stuff and you literally drop it, or you come with a whipper snipper and you cut up all the weeds and you leave that stuff in the soil. What happens is, again, that all that energy then dies out and goes back into your soil. But if it's a really rainy season like it was, then all those seeds germinate and you have more weeds again. But it's better than not doing it, I find, because it tells me that my soil is always very productive. Like, it's producing weeds, so it can produce food. So that's one of the main things that I do is the chop and drop. Copious amounts of compost, as I mentioned before. I let my plants really die back at the end of the season. Then I clean early in the spring so that any energy that was in them goes back into the soil before I even take them out.
And so since like you're both organic, so inputs is primarily compost then, correct?
Primarily compost. You can use certified organic manures and microbes and all that stuff, but nothing chemical. Like for me, pest control consists of soaking garlic in water and using that water to spray on my plants. It keeps a lot of soft-bodied pests away. And anybody who's growing garlic can tell you that nothing really bothers your garlic in the garden. Like I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, wow, the bunnies got to my garlic." You never had that happen. So it's like that kind of thing. Like, you look at what they don't like, you put it around, and you get a really determined dare will get to it regardless, and there's nothing you can do about that. But yeah, garlic water is my biggest pest control mechanism, if you will.
Very cool. I never heard of that one before.
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't. Do you do any like intercropping or cover cropping, anything like that?
Cover cropping. Oh, I should have added that to my list of things that I want to add on this year. But this year it seems like more of a reality than in the past, just because there's so many things going on. And for some reason I tend to when the season's wrapping up, we got to wrap up irrigation. For some reason, that's usually the time my kids seem to be born. So my second son was born on the 25th of September while I'm still wrapping up the season.
Perfect. It's a different type of harvest.
Yes. And the first one was born in November 2 years ago while I needed to plant my garlic. So it's like, so that kind of affects me deciding if I want to plant a cover crop, if I need to, like I haven't been focused on that in the past few years, but this year looks like the year that I can really focus on the cover crop sort of thing. I do keep my ground covered with row covers, and I try my best. Like what the closest thing to intercropping that I do would be tomatoes and basil. I grow them in the same rows. What I find happens is that the basil will pull more of the pests. I don't get a very good basil harvest because they draw all of the pests to them, but it keeps my tomatoes from being sacrificed. So that's one of the things that I do.
So you mentioned that you could use manure, but there's no need because of the compost?
No, well, chicken manure I do use when I'm planting directly in the holes. I put a little bit in there. But beyond that, I don't use any form of manure or anything else other than that. Okay. Like Actisol is commonplace on the farm, like the go-to for most farmers. Just because we know that it is composted properly. We know that it is okayed by the organic certification bodies and these things. So we really try to stick within that as far as what we use and what we don't use.
And what about like tillage? Because I think because you're saying like that seed bank is just full of weeds, and I know no-till farmers can get around it by like spraying chemicals, which obviously in both your cases you can't do. So do you have to do a bit of tillage then? Or?
Yeah, we now have become a site where a lot of arborists are dropping off wood chips. So we're starting to have a surplus of wood chips. So this year I have a plan I think I mentioned this to you in the past, that I want to add these wood chips onto an area and then cover those areas with my compost and then grow my cucurbits in there. And then the next year, while the wood chips break down, I can plant my potatoes and some root crops in there. So this is one of my experiments that I will do this year to see how that helps out with weed suppression and also with soil building, because we have very clay soils on the farm, and it's good for a grower. It's very nutrients dense, but as far as being able to grow root crops very well, it's hit or miss, because if that clay is tight, nothing's getting through there. You end up with a carrot that looks Not like a carrot. Yes. Yeah. So these are the things that we deal with on the site.
So Shan, what are some of the regenerative agriculture practices you use?
This is our year number 6, growing season number 7, I think, coming onto this Just Food community farm. And over the years, we have turned from having to till the land, building beds until again next year, but then more shifting that practice into having permanent beds and not needing to till at all as of 2 years ago. So yeah, that puts me out of a job because I'm the tractor person at the farm. So I use that time to provide trainings of tractoring to other farmers, especially women farmers. But the no-till, I think, is a sort of a stable. It really, there are many techniques around the world. There is beds that are like Chinese permanent beds where you can build a little ledge to contain the water in, and over the time, all the nutrients, all your covers and then the decayed material from the previous year will add nutrients to this particular bed without leaching out into the ground. And then if you do enough rotate your different vegetables, and that it becomes really like the better over the years. So permanent beds is one of them. And then as of 5 years ago, we started to raising chickens on the farm. And starting 3 seasons ago, we start to have them year round. So we overwinter them. We choose the chicken varieties that are resilient to the Canadian winter. But chicken manure composted is a big part of where our plant food comes from, in addition to compost and what Chadwick said, the wood chip. There is an awesome program in Ottawa called Chip Drop, and allows arborists to drop their chips of your choosing, size, like load and the type of wood. So you can choose to have them delivered to the farm, and they love it because it saves them a trip to wherever they have to go far to drop that chip, and then it gives the farmers a really good option. And as organic growers, we can't have them on our bed, but we can have them in between of the rows. So the rows are relatively weed-free because of all that. And then all that nutrients also become plant food over the years.
So how come as an organic grower you can't have it on your bed? I'm assuming the tree's organic, but maybe I'm completely wrong. But
yeah, you have to be able to, in order to have that, you need to have a certificate or whatever they're called, a written thing from the owner of the tree, just saying these trees are not sprayed, which you're right, and they are mostly they're not. And the arborist knows really well when they go cut the tree, they understand the history of the tree. But so if we were to incorporate that into the organic practice, we're going to need a formal trail of paperwork.
And then you mentioned also sort of, I guess, kind of what we describe as like crop rotation. So you make sure, like, if you grew squash in this bed one year, next year you're going to turn it into something else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in terms of farm grown, we try to minimize hauling in out of the farm nutrients. We try to grow them at the farm wherever possible. We grow almost over half an acre of sunchoke, Jerusalem artichoke. So this is an amazing perennial plant, and we have a big community harvest every year. And the stems of sunchoke becomes really excellent ground covers, also for a lot of our beds as well.
Prioritizing social justice, food sovereignty, and economic viability is the final principle of regenerative agriculture we'll be introducing through this series. Remember, if you're looking for all 10 principles that we covered in this series, you want to go to the Regeneration Canada website. You can read about them there. A truly regenerative agricultural system requires that everybody involved, farmers, farm laborers, processors, and consumers, just to name a few, are winning. By this, we mean there should be no extreme disparities between the groups of people who participate in and rely on farming, food processing, or distribution. In order to prevent extreme disparities, discrimination, and social inequality, A regenerative food system advocates and creates a space for all voices to be heard and participate in decision making at all levels of government. If you haven't picked up on this yet, sometimes food production is more than just producing food. So I found out when I talked to you on the phone, Sun Shan, that didn't really hit me, or it hadn't hit me before, that like anytime I have a food sovereignty conversation, very rarely is it with like a farmer or a rancher. It's always with somebody who's living in a city who doesn't really produce much food. So it just kind of hit, it was just strange, like why are the people that are producing the food not really like involved in the food sovereignty conversation? So that's kind of where this question came from. So like the principle we're dealing with talks about social justice, talks about economic viability, talks about food sovereignty. I'm just wondering, with those two, there's social justice and food sovereignty, how are both of those, or how is one of those connected to what you're doing with your farming business?
For sure. I think that is like such an important question. I don't know if I'm well versed because I was brought up like always interested in the natural world, but being a farmer really exposed you to these issues. Both Chadwick and I are members of National Farmers Union, and we're both connected to the BIPOC caucus belonging to that's part of the National Farmers Union. And I think I've learned a lot through that route with my fellow BIPOC farmers on those very issues. As an example, I am Eastern Asia origin. I am one of the visible minorities. When I come to an agricultural meeting, I rarely you do see other BIPOC farmers, but not to the degree of our population, does not reflect diversity of our population in Canada. And I've been trying to speak upon this issue throughout my agricultural, whenever there is a social gathering. Why is it that many farmers, many immigrants come from a background where they would like to try growing their own food or even growing at a farmer level, but why is it that our agricultural grower diversity doesn't reflect that desire or the population? I think the immigration policy, going through that fun process ourselves of Canada, the immigration doesn't necessarily is conducive of having farmers joining as immigrants. But more than that, the folks who come in don't know how to access land as much as they would like to. I occasionally get on to a taxi ride, and my driver, would mostly not having a lot of conversation, except when I bring up the farming. Oh, I happen to be raising chickens or a farmer. And then the whole conversation break open, and they're like, how did you get to do that? How can I also do that? Of course, at this point, I talk about just food, community farm. But then I think in a larger picture, we're really lacking a diversity. And how does that connect to the social justice or food sovereignty? Without diversity, without a really thriving population working on agriculture, you are faced, of course, with an aging farmer population, but you're also not really nurturing a new generation of farmers that can bring their knowledge and different set of trainings and different cultural backgrounds and medicinal knowledge into our future farming outlook. So I think being able to open up access to land and giving folks that opportunity is something that I think this country should take serious consideration for. And right now, through National Farmers Union and other organizations, I think work is underway, but it's far from there. I wouldn't be able to farm without just food being sort of an anchor in Ottawa. I don't know in the situation of Chadwick. I know that many others want to farm, but just don't have the means to.
Great answer. Thank you. All right, Chadwick.
Social justice and food sovereignty. Well, yeah, a lot of people come in from having some farming experience or some farming background overseas. But one thing I never touched on before, but Sun Shan mentioned, is that the immigration process does not necessarily make it easy to come in as a farmer that wants to farm here, sort of, because, it's like it's just lumped in certain ways. Either you work as a farmer for someone else, then it's nothing like what you've done before. So because most farming in most of the world is, especially in the third world, is very different from what it is here. People very seldom have huge tractors and combines and whatnot when they're farming, but they produce a lot of food. And but I think because of that, they're not able, and it's not as formally documented. Like you're a farm manager, or you're a this, or you're that. You work on the farm, yes, but there's no titles. There's and understanding that for myself. It's like how do you expect me to show all this documentation of my farming to you? Like, so it means that they have to go into something like taxi driving or Uber driving or something else, and then they get into these things, and they waste away. Then you see some of them who are fortunate enough to get into somewhere to farm, and they have nightmare horror stories. Like there's a new guy who's on the Just Food site now, and in the previous year he rented from a private landowner, and when his crop was ready, they just kicked him out, and he is a Syrian refugee. So it's like he has to think about all of these things and how he deals with the situation, and these are the things that you end up with. And I recently went to the EFAO conference, and I'm saying to them, well, how do we make farming more sustainable on public lands? By being more inclusive, because it is not an inclusive space. Farming is in Canada is not an inclusive space, in that if you just come into any farmers meeting anywhere in Canada and you look around the room, if there's one Black person in that room, one Asian person in that room, Middle Eastern person, that's a lot. And, just based off, not even just being present in the room, but being able, the cultural differences are very apparent, because farmers are a unique bunch. Whether despite the cultures that they come from, despite which part of the world they're in, they're very, like, you can tell, like, there's certain things about them that are set. Like, they will be who they are. They'll stick with that, and they don't want to change. So it's very hard for them to accept that you coming from this place is a legit farmer to them. So it's kind of, and it's not even a race thing. It's just what it is. Like when you become a farmer, after a while, it's like, I don't want to hear anything from anybody else. This is what I do. This is how I do it. In my country, some people will do crop rotation, but some people swear, even the extension officers can't get to them, because some people swear by, this area is the best area for my sweet potatoes. You're not telling me otherwise. Don't come to my, like, that's how it is. So I think getting that gap to be bridged takes younger farmers and older farmers. Older farmers maybe having an intermediary going in and saying to them, hey, we know you care about the land, because a lot of the older farmers do care about the land. And what happens is, because they have no exit strategy, they end up selling the farms out to all these developers. And that's happening all over the place. We've had to sign petitions fighting against Doug Ford giving up the Greenbelt lands and whatnot. But these things happen because we do not have an ability to bridge that gap and allow for the people who want to come in and do it to do it, because they think that when you come in as an immigrant, you come in to take over the lands. Well, no, we actually just want to do something that we've been doing and we love doing, just the same way that you love doing it. We care about the land. We care about food security. We care about where our food comes from just as much as you do. And having somebody who cares about that land, who will come in and grow on it, versus having somebody who will give you a bunch of money for it and then rip it up, dig everything out and put a bunch of subdivisions on it, is better for the long term. So you have to realize that making farming a more inclusive space is a big part of the social justice, a big part of the food sovereignty thing. And like I'm always trying to get into these rooms, and I'm always trying to say those things. And I'm always trying to be mindful to not make it seem like it's just about race, because it's not. But it's about actually people being able to have those uncomfortable conversations and then move forward from there. And then when we start having those conversations, we realize, well, wait, we really are very similar, which is why I say that farmers are not much different anywhere you go in the world. When they get set in their ways, and it prevents them from being open to the change or being open to the new things. That, okay, we have farmers coming in, but they don't look like what you thought they would look like. but they are. If you give them a chance, you'll see that they have those same intuitive ways that make them a farmer, because it's a very unique set of personality traits that make you a farmer. And I don't think you're born with them. I think it develops in you. And the only way to see that is to open up first to dialogue and then open up to giving people a shot. And Just Food is one of the few, it's like the only gig in town doing that right now. So on my end, what I try to do to help that is I work with a lot of youth on my farms during the summer. And it's more so about just showing them what they're doing. It kind of slows down my business sometimes, because some of them, they really are slow when it comes to picking up the thing, but it also gives them a level of mentorship. And I try to encourage them to, hey, when you're doing something, you do it to your best, for not because of your employer, but because it makes you feel good when you do it. And then what happens is that they start the season not liking it, but at the end of the season, they're like, oh, wait, I grew that. And then, I don't use Snapchat or anything, but you see them putting out their phones and they're on Snap showing up all the things. I'm like, wow. But it works, and then that's how you get. It's like me finding a way to bridge that gap with them. It's like, okay, you want to post what you've grown, but you have to plant it first, and you have to take care of it, and you have to actually get a feel for it. So that's how I'm trying to contribute to the food sovereignty, by getting the younger generation involved in whatever way that seems fit to them. Because if I was to tell them to do it without no phones or anything, I'm sure they wouldn't like that. But the fact that they can now post that on their snaps, they love that. So it's like, finding a way for us to meet each other where we're at is the biggest thing I see helping up with social justice and food security in this country.
Obviously we can create spaces that are more inclusive, but at the end of the day, farming needs to be profitable, or folks who don't come from inherited wealth, they're just gonna have to go do something else to support their families. So what can we, so as we create this inclusive space, how can we make it an economically viable enterprise for I guess anybody, but in this case here, I guess we're specifically talking about folks who are either new to Canada or been here for a while, and are trying to get into agriculture. But yeah, for that robust, diverse space, how can we help with that economic viability piece? Honestly, if you guys asked me that question, I wouldn't know what to say. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I absolutely do. Having the experience of it, I realized that with Just Food, they have a startup farm program, and they train you before you start your first season. How I would help that program to make it better, or how I would tweak it, would be to add ongoing trainings at certain stages, because they give you everything that you could experience in slides and whatnot, and you retain exactly about 10% of that. That's being generous. And then you go in and you start farming, and then in this season you're like, oh, I need this, and you probably already touched on that in that training, but it didn't make any sense. So it's like being on the incubator farm. One thing I would say that I would work with people is every season, see where you're at, and then we know exactly where you should. We get a gauge, and this is what I'm trying to find ways to document it for myself. What are the things that I see are necessary that I need now, and then apply those things so that later on we can probably tweak the program to that. Because I found that the first thing is mastering the challenges of what you might encounter with getting your fields ready, getting your crops in time, getting certain crops harvested out in time. These things, first 2 years, you're still working on that. If, for me, I mentioned this before, I never had to grow in a finite growing season. It's always the next day there's going to be the sun, there's going to be rain, it's always a growing season. So I never had to think about planning for that. So understanding that part, especially for new farmers who come from out of this country, is going to be a big learning curve. Then, once you've understood that and you have a bunch of produce, how do you sell that produce? Because there's little techniques to setting up your stall at the farmer's market, stack them high and watch them fly, and all these things that you don't know, So you come out there and you have really good produce, but how do you then deal with the post-harvest, and how do you deal with getting it to sell more? How do you tap into the restaurant space? So you see there's the mentorship needs to be an ongoing thing. So while you're in it, we can give you a setup of an overview of everything. But over the first 3 years, some touch-ups according to where you should be or where you might be. And after that 3 to 4 year period, if we would have a bunch of viable, I believe we would have more viable farmers who then can decide, well, hey, I want to do a farmer's market, or I prefer to do a farm store, or I prefer to do it online. I'm going to take a whole new approach and just have people order their produce on my website and whatnot. But it really takes understanding all the little intricacies, because a lot of the new farmers on site that I've met, they want to do it full time, but they don't. And unfortunately, if it stays the same way, they probably won't ever do it full time until they retire. And it's simply because this is not paying me enough for me to focus on it. But what is changing? What are the changes that are being made to allow it to pay you full time? I think farming, I disagree with the fact that people say, the statement that people make when they say there's no money in farming. Everybody eats food. But how do you tap into that money is where more so the challenge, because growing the food is easier than selling the food. And that's where we end up with a lot of the problems. And that's why people are like, oh, you don't make much money as a farmer. Well, how do we get around that? Because everybody has to eat. So where is the disconnect? The disconnect is not understanding what your clients need, and the disconnect is not your customers not understanding how much work goes into that. So there's a few things, but I think the most important things would be to ongoing training over a 3 to 4 year period while you're actually farming. And then that way you can implement better procedures to sell your produce. And as you get better at selling your produce, then you start to think in a way that allows you to now see some profit. I think you should be prepared to not be viable in the first at least 2 to 3 years. If you make a profit, if you break even the first 2 years, if you make a profit of about 1%, 5%, 10%, you should be happy with that. But after that time, I think you can make a viable living of that. And it doesn't have to be by taking a super expensive course. That no faults to anybody, because there's a lot of those trainings out there that are viable and have helped a lot of people to scale up quickly. But if I'm trying to learn to farm, and this is all I want to, or I'm trying to master farming in this climate, spending $4,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 on a training to tell me all the things I need to get in to start my farm properly before I even start my farm, which I'm going to have to spend money on, just is not on the top, not up there. Like, it's not accessible for a lot of people.
Economic viability, anything you wanted to add to that? Or
Yeah, well, Chadwick said 2 to 3 years, and let me stretch to 5 to 6 years. I don't have the answer. We are, very honestly, we're second career farmers, so we have established in other ways before we came to farming. That's why I have so much admiration for younger farmers who are just doing this and for like really exploring there. Also, that's why after we visited those 30, 40 farms at the onset of our farming, we decided that we would not push ourselves to the limits. I know a lot of farmers quit at the end to just because it's just too intense. So we adopted that half agriculture, half X lifestyle. I'm intending to translate that book into English, by the way, because it's just like, half agriculture, half arts, half agriculture, half design, or, podcasting. At the beginning, when I started chatting about this idea with farmers in Bruce County, and by the way, in Bruce County, farmers on average have 200 acres of land, and usually one member of the family would go and work for the industry, and it's the nuclear industry, to make ends meet. So that is the cruel reality of farming. And, we grow 2 acres, so how can we be economically viable? So half agriculture, half X. At the beginning, when we mentioned to folks there, they were like, it's a shame that you're not able to make ends meet by farming. So there was a general sense of that, like you're not smart enough or hardworking enough or like open-minded enough. However, there are a lot of illuminating conversations when we're like half agriculture, half something else, like turn that your love for the land and your inspiration from the land into something that you're good at doing is not a shameful thing It is a good thing to do. So I think there is definitely a mindset, at least for the first couple of years, or maybe for the lifetime. And it is a thing. And so that's sort of the mindset we do have. And then in terms of really making the farming side of things more viable, having value-added products such as fermentation, such as I know a lot of farmers also work for farm-related organizations. That's part of your X, but it is really good for you to rise above your own little plot and then take a look at, things that are what's happening in the general scene of farming, how to support other fellow farmers using your knowledge and your know-how. So I think a lot of that will sort of balance the side of unviable nature of startup farming. And I think those were those helped us get through all of these years without quitting farming, because we do not want to quit farming. That's something we'd like to do till our old age, because it's our sense of good food and good so many things, and the sense of contribution. And just the very fact that doing farming is not economically viable probably is a sore spot, but maybe we can work on that sore spot and then use that as a connector for the community.
That was one of my favorite parts of the entire interview. I have so much admiration and respect for how bold and honest Sun Shan and Chadwick were with their words and how they just told it like it is. Social justice, equity, inclusion, and economic viability are all things I'd like to think anybody can get behind. And after listening to Chadwick and Sun Shan, you might be able to see how they're all connected. But I guess the question is, what can regenerative agriculture do about these extremely valuable and desirable concepts?
Maybe a bit of philosophical level is with regen agriculture, you work with ecosystem and you see how a system work, not a human system, but you see how one thing help another thing. You're at the farm, everything is connected. Maybe to adopt that principle with our human system and make it more of an ecosystem than sort of the siloed way that we interact with each other. Being a cultural interpreter and medical interpreter, it gets me to visit a lot of the community centers and community housing and seniors' homes and places like that. I really am seeing a disconnectivity to, for example, the excess of production here at our farm, and we can't sell a lot of the things. Our cooler during the peak months are piled with food that we weren't able to send, and the food bank wouldn't take because they're like odd vegetables. But at all of these other places that I visit, there is a sense of food insecurity or lack of food sovereignty due to people coming from different cultural backgrounds and just unable to really access good food. So maybe those are places the ecosystem thinking can work. How can we get out of our just farming set and going into more of a community system set? Because the root of the problem is systemic. So we need to really borrow the wisdom of nature and of our indigenous peoples and to really re-extend ourselves into these other seemingly unconnected places in our community. So that's a thinking, that's a thought I've been having very constantly. And I've been trying to connect with other folks to hopefully another winter thing to do.
Could have a busy winter, but you're doing a lot of great things. That's awesome. Chadwick, same question for you. Do you think there's something unique about regen ag or the type of farming you're doing right now that puts it in a good position to help create that food system where everybody wins?
What I think is unique is close to getting into a system where everybody can win is that it's focused on systems and how systems work together. Working with versus working against. Conventional agriculture is about how can I make this soil give me what I want, regardless of what the soil wants to do, And regenerative agriculture is focused on how can I get this soil to thrive How can I get the ecosystem to thrive so then it can produce the food in the best way possible. And these are the things that make it unique, because then you take into consideration the human aspect of it, the fact that humans need to eat, humans need to have a living too, and you realize that it is something that can be viable, but cost-wise, financially, I don't know what the best solution is right now. I think full regenerative agricultural practice without the use of any machines, I don't see that working for economical viability for farmer just yet. I think finding a sweet spot of scale is one thing, because mixed vegetable farmers, you can grow a lot of vegetables in a lot less space than you would cash crops like corn and soy. And how many of us go to the supermarket to buy corn and soy? As corn and soy, it's in a lot of things that we eat, but realistically speaking, most of the fresh veggies that we buy that feed ourselves can grow on much smaller plots and can grow with a lot less things. So it is very viable. But again, who's going to make that change? Like, are we going to get the higher ups, the movers and shakers, to realize that, well, you guys need to push and put in the legislation that needs to happen to help that? Because we can say that it wants, and we can wish that it happens, but unless the higher ups that are in power don't make changes that allow for it to be easier for us to grow and to compete with, big factory farms, then it's never going to work out. And that is the problem right now. It's like, yes, I can produce on 1 acre, maybe 2 acres. I think I can max out at 5 acres and supply wholesale consistently and never be short on that. But that is not viable unless I have some supports coming from, a little grants here or concessions on certain things to allow me to establish those things in the way that they need to be done. Labor intensiveness of this kind of farming is a challenge. And the alternative is to have tractors, have implements. But then that also is a challenge, because the cost of those things is very high. And even if you take them on and you have a time to pay them off, it's like then now you really do need to find some way to make sure that you're making that money. And then you have to now burn the candle at both ends. If you're not making all the money from the farm, then you go off farm and make that money. And then it's like, this was what I was trying to not do. So I think there is something that is to be said for the higher ups helping out with that, because if you really care about the food safety and security and sovereignty, then you will actually adjust your policies to reward the smaller farmers who are producing the foods that most people actually use.
Last question, then we can call it a day. It's going to be the last question of the series, because you guys are the final episode of the series, actually. No pressure, sorry. That's putting a lot of pressure on you right there, but anyway.
Say something smart.
Yeah, exactly. You've been saying a lot of smart things, so I wouldn't worry about it. But it's a fairly simple question, but it also can make somebody feel kind of exposed of, why are you farming? Like, we've just discussed how profit margins are pretty tight. Based on my own experience living in another country, like, I'm kind of vaguely aware of how challenging it can be moving to another country with different languages, different just custom, there's a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
So it's like you decided to take on that challenge, and you got one of the most stressed out economic sectors probably in the entire economy. Why are you doing this, Chadwick?
Why am I doing this? Truthfully, because I love it. I love watching things grow. I love making things grow. And it's not boring. It really isn't boring. It's like, it's never going to be a dull day. It's never going to be like more of the same monotonous life. Like I said before, you get to do different things and hate your life. It is painful on the body sometimes, because it can be very physically demanding, but you do feel you feel amazing, like doing that. Like, you feel like you can take on the world, but not really. But you feel that way. Like, you come in, you plant stuff, you get stuff going. At the beginning of the season, everywhere is so empty. and then you're like, nothing's growing, and it takes a while, and all of a sudden everything's exploding, and then everything's green, and it's like, whoa, I did that. I did that. Booyah, you feel good about yourself for doing that. And that feeling is, I think maybe I'm addicted to that feeling. Who knows? But that's a big part of it for me. It's like seeing it happen, especially on seasons where nothing's going right, and you get things in the ground late, and but then everything turns out, and you still end up being able to meet your CSA demands, just barely, but you met them nonetheless. That is like, maybe I'm an adrenaline junkie. Who knows? maybe that's what it is. But that feeling of fulfillment, of accomplishment that comes from being a farmer is, and every year I get to do this and feel this, whereas you can sit in a job for 5 years and never get a promotion and be like, what the hell? Like, why am I even doing this? Whereas every year I can see what I've done and see my accomplishment. That is why I farm.
Sun Shan, why are you doing this?
Well, what Chadwick said, in addition, I would say as a woman farmer, I do I have a lot of friends because I come from an environment background. People who work on the environment tend to be not so hopeful with the things are going, with the way things are going, and climate and all the disasters, and a lot of these international treaties are like they're simply like not working in a way. So I used to get quite disheartened or depressed by the outlook for the children, like what kind of the world will they live in. Farming, I think, brought me back to be in touch with the reality. And as a woman, I do feel like the blood of the Mother Earth, the water in the ground, in my vegetables also flow in my own body. So there is a intense sense of healing and hopefulness in farming. And all we need to figure out is how to really make it viable economically. So we oftentimes joke with our family and friends. We say we've never been so poor in our life, income-wise, but never also felt so enriched in our lifetime to feel hopeful. And, what Chadwick describes, the field, and they grow, and the field is so generous with all the things. It feeds you, it feeds a big community of people. It's only that our economic model is not designed to reward that kind of things yet. But I think as a family farm, we right now, as long as we can still barely make things go, we're gonna continue doing this.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's a really great way to end the Stories of Regeneration series. Thank you. If you're ever in Ottawa, I highly recommend visiting Sun Shan and Chadwick at the Just Food Community Farm. Just tell them I sent you. Regenerative agriculture is a system of agriculture based on principles that we covered throughout this series, and those principles are meant to be applied depending on the context of an individual farm or ranch. But the foundation those principles sit upon is that regenerative agriculture strives to leave the land better off than when we received it, and this has implications for everything that interacts with that land. From the tiniest soil microbe to the mightiest of watersheds, to people like me and you that eat the food that comes off of that land. But who are these regenerative farmers and ranchers? Based on what we heard in the series, they tend to be people farming or ranching in ways that make them a bit of a lone wolf or an anomaly in their communities, sometimes to the point of their own frustration. But despite that, you get the sense they just can't help themselves but regenerate the communities that they're embedded in. Like a lot of agriculture producers out there, a lot of them are stressed, especially after the droughts, the wildfires, the smoke, and the floods of the growing season of 2023. Some of them struggle to be profitable. Others haven't fully gone down the regenerative agriculture path quite yet because that economic viability piece remains challenging. And a lot of them, and honestly this one was one of the biggest surprises for me, a lot of them told us that regenerative agriculture just made farming fun again. I'll be completely honest with you, after 10 episodes at 10 different farms and ranches, I was left with the impression that most regenerative agriculture producers are fighting with one hand tied behind their back. They'd gladly do more through their farming and ranching practices to regenerate land, communities, and the ecosystem. But right now, we don't really have anything in place to reward or compensate them adequately for those efforts. And we have very little safeguards in place to minimize the risks of transitioning a farm or ranch to a regenerative agriculture system. Once we do, we're going to be unleashing a pretty amazing and largely untapped resource that can help us address those social and environmental crises we face as a society. And not only that, we also get greater access to healthy and delicious food in the process. We'd like to thank all of the agriculture producers from across Canada who participated in the Stories of Regeneration project. So thank you, Sun Shan, Chadwick, Craig, Peter, Rebecca, Mike, Vincent, Simon-Pierre, Aaron, Rachel, Rebecca, Blake, Derek, Tanis, and Ryan. They're also family members and friends and farmhands who were key to this story, but didn't quite make it into the recordings. So we'd like to thank them as well. I'm Derek Leahy, and thank you for listening to the Stories of Regeneration series and taking this journey with us. Rural Roots to Climate Solutions is an Alberta-based organization empowering agriculture producers and the communities they live in with climate solutions. Rural Roots runs workshops, farm field days, webinars, and participant-driven projects like the Siksikaitsatipi Agriculture Project and the Regenerative Agriculture Lab. We produce a farmer's blog, and of course, we do this podcast. For more information about us and what we do, go to the website, which is www.rr2cs.ca. The rest of the amazing and talented Rural Roots to Climate Solutions team is Cheyenne Younger, Kristen Mountain, Shelley Seed, and Lance Tailfeathers. The podcast is funded by a variety of Alberta-based funders and funders based in other parts of Canada. The Stories of Regeneration project is primarily funded by Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. The project's led by Regeneration Canada, a fantastic not-for-profit organization that advocates for soil health to mitigate climate change and guarantee a healthy food system. It's an organization that Rural Roots is proud to partner with. For additional information, videos, blog posts, digital materials about the agriculture producers featured throughout the series, visit regenerationcanada.org. A big shout out to Antonius, Sarah, Ali, Paige, and Genevieve from the Regeneration Canada team, and Jean-Marc, Phil, and Obed from the film crew, who all worked tirelessly to bring this project to life. It was an absolute pleasure working with you folks. The interview with Sun Shan and Chadwick was recorded on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and my parts of this episode were recorded on Treaty 7 lands and in the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Happy farming wherever you are in the world, and remember, what's good for the climate is good for the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM at the University of Guelph or via podcast. Please join us again next time for another episode of Food Farm Talk.